If there was ever a time that you felt your friends and family needed the love of Christ most, it might just be right now. And if there was ever a time that you felt you had very little to give, it is probably now in this time of separation. When we hear of people who need help or are suffering or who could just use a hug right now, it weighs on us because there is so little we can do while we are in quarantine. 3 out of 4 Gospels record a story about some friends who were absolutely hopeless when it came to helping their helpless friend. They got to the point where there was only one option left, and that was to take their paralyzed friend to Christ. I'm going to glean information from all 3 accounts, but let's just read the Mark account for the sake of time. In Mark 2, 1 through 12, we read, "And when he returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home. And many were gathered together, so that there was no more room, not even at the door. And he was preaching the word to them. And they came, bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 men. And when they could not get near him because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him, and when they had made an opening, they let down the bed on which the paralytic lay. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, 'Son, your sins are forgiven.' Now some of the scribes were sitting there, questioning in their hearts, 'Why does this man speak like that? He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?' And immediately Jesus, perceiving in his spirit that they thus questioned within themselves, said to them, 'Why do you question these things in your hearts? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, "Your sins are forgiven," or to say, "Rise, take up your bed and walk"? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." And at this point he turns back to the paralyzed man and he says, "I say to you, rise, pick up your bed, and go home." And he rose, and immediately picked up his bed, and went out before them all, so that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, "We never saw anything like this." Several things in this story really stand out and warrant more attention than I can give in just a couple minutes. So I want to focus primarily on the friends of the paralytic. What can we discern from their efforts? Well, the first is the extent to which they went to bring their friend to Jesus. We know they carried him on a bed, and we don't know if this was simply a sheet or a sack full of straw or an actual frame of some kind. But in any case, there were no EMT stretchers that came, complete with collapsible wheels and an ambulance. This was a physical feat that would have been exhausting. It definitely cost them something and took great effort. Second, this was not the Sabbath, so they probably had to take off work to unify their efforts and get this man to Christ. This would have cost them something. Third, once they got to the house and found that they could not enter because the crowds were so great, they had to get this man somehow to the roof. Though there were probably stairs, they were most likely very steep and narrow. No elevators, no escalators, just hard work. This would have cost them something. Fourth, once they got up to the roof, they had to pull the roof apart. In Capernaum at that time, it is most likely that the roof was made out of a series of sturdy beams which supported a network of small logs and branches and maybe even been plastered over with mud. Now, Luke's account does mention that the paralytic was lowered through the tiles. So it is possible that this could have been a tiled roof, the kind that was becoming more popular in Palestine at that time. In any case, these 4 friends had to make an opening of at least 5 feet by maybe 2.5 feet to lower their friend down to Jesus. And once this endeavor was over, they would doubtless have been responsible for repairing the damages they caused. And this would have cost them something. Now, I believe the main point of this story is to demonstrate that Jesus is God, that he has power of God in healing, and that he also possesses the power of God in forgiving sins. But I want to focus in closing on the curious phrase in verse 5, and when Jesus saw their faith. It was not solely the faith of the paralytic that he was healed, although his faith may have contributed. What we do know is that Jesus healed the man based on the collective faith of his friends as well. And that brings us back to my opening comments about how helpless we feel that we are in helping our friends and family and fellow Christians in this time of quarantine and social distancing. Amid all the separation, we can still bring each other to Christ in prayer. It may cost us a little in the way of time and effort, but we can go directly and boldly to the throne of grace to receive mercy and find grace in time of need. Let's do whatever it takes to be bringing each other to Jesus in prayer today, all week, and until Christ returns. And until we see each other again, stay safe, stay in prayer, and stay in the Word.